Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples on a, it's not a bad morning here in southern Florida. It's probably in the high 60s. The humidity isn't awful just yet, even though it's going to be later. And this is probably one of the last good mornings we're going to have before all of the humid, nasty, swampy shit starts descending on us. Over the next few months, and it just makes us miserable all the way through, at least until October. And this is when the really smart people get out of town and leave the rest of us to this. I mean, it's nice that the traffic decreases, but otherwise, it's just not fit for human living. Animals have been at a minimum for, I know it's kind of a thing that they breed like rabbits, and I don't see any now, but man, are we inundated with rabbits lately. And where I live, where I moved to after leaving my house a few months ago, is just covered with rabbits. They're everywhere, and we have a particularly ugly rabbit. I tried to get a picture of him, but he darted off, and I don't know what the hell is wrong with him, but he's frightening and he's ugly, and he's haunting my front yard in the morning, so I have to keep an eye out for him. But otherwise, here in Peter's driveway, things have been kind of quiet on the animal front. Let me give you a quick update before we jump into this car. I'll give you this one. The old saying is, show me your friends and I'll show you yourself. And I think that's true. I think, in fact, that's one of the axioms of life. And I have a couple of friends. I won't name names. It's not fair to them to do that. But, it's okay, Al and Chris. These are two friends of mine. And both of them, as I pointed out before, Al is intensely cheap, but he's also a bastard. And I want to highlight a little video he sent me the other day of him, I don't know what other words you could use, torturing his poor wife. She's such a nice woman. She cooks, she cleans, she runs a bicycle store for him. She just has dedicated her life to Al, and the way he treats her, without much ado, here it is. I'm going to put in a little video that he sent me of her trying to paddle back to shore on a little round raft. So here it goes.
Row, come on. Row. I'll help you. Start rowing. Go that side. Keep going. No, go one side. Spin it all the way around one time.
Has nothing to do with that.
Come on, baby, row it. You can do it.
She's yelling for me.
That's all right. Okay, row to shore. Row.
All right, so that's Al. That's who Al is. You can see that. I'm not even going to comment on it. I think you can see what went on there and just what an evil son of a bitch he is. That brings us to Chris, who I've talked about before. And Chris is the worst human being on earth, without question. I mean, he is a horrible, horrible person, my friend Chris. I just can't even believe people like him exist. But here's what happened with, I don't know how you say it. Is it a meme or a meme or whatever the hell it is? But I was on Twitter and I saw this meme of, that I thought made a lot of sense, because somebody posted, they said, look, if you want to keep your girl thin, take a picture of her and feed her through this fat filter and then send it to her. And here's the meme. And I thought, yeah, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then we were walking around the auction at the Premier Auction a month ago or so. And I thought, we should try this with Chris. Let's take a picture of him and feed him through the fat filter and see what we come up with. So here is the before picture of Chris. And here is the after picture of Chris, which got fed through the fat filter. It's the same picture. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, the filter had absolutely no idea what to do. It's like, oh my God. how do I add weight to this guy? So anyway, while that doesn't make Chris a bad person, obviously it's all the other shit that makes him a bad person. I did think it was a story worth sharing, but in the spirit of keeping videos shorter and jumping right into things, we're going to do that right now with this vehicle. We're going to jump right on it. And this is one that I picked up from Auto House the other day. I saw it sitting there and I thought, it's not really my thing, but I think I should probably do one because it is a curious car and it is something that, has sort of an historical meaning. And, we'll start with this one. So this is a 1993 Land Rover Defender 110. It's a British model. You can see right there through the window that it's right-hand drive, something that absolutely annoys the shit out of me as I'm driving it around. I always end up putting the driver, what I call the driver's side of the vehicle, up into the median and shit because I'm used to being over the left side of the lane. But, you learn to live with it. Unlike some of the Japanese cars, at least they did put the turn signal on the right side of the steering column. Not the right side, but the correct side, so that I'm able to use the signals. But I drove I don't remember what it was. I think it was a Toyota Celica of some sort, which was a JDM car. I'll link it below. And every time I tried to turn on the turn signal, I ended up hitting the wipers, and it just annoyed the crap out of me. I'm just not a big fan of the whole right. Could we not unify in this regard? Could we not say, okay, we're just going to come to one conclusion for the entire globe and put the wheel on the friggin' correct side, which to me is on the left. I know British guys are going to fight me on that, but it's just for the sake of human happiness. But anyway, so it's a 1993 Land Rover Defender, and you look at this thing and you kind of know what it is, but it's not in the wheelhouse of most everyday non-car people. I mean, I would say that when you bring up the name Land Rover or Range Rover, more properly for them, to sort of a modern non-car people, you think of that Range Rover, which debuted globally in 1970 but didn't make its way here until 1987. And two types of people drive them now. British supervillains, which you'll see in certain movies, and then these sort of angry, middle-aged, well-coiffed blonde woman, mostly realtors, who drink wine from a box, drive aggressively, and just look angry all the time. Some of them have kind of angry, shitty little dogs as well. So, that's what most people think of when you say the word Land Rover. But in fact, it has much more proper roots and goes way back to the post-war period. It basically became one of the most iconic cars in world history. I mean, absolutely one of the most important cars ever to roll down the road, or as it were, roll through some rough terrain. I don't like them. I'll tell you why I don't. I mean, it's not fair. I guess if I needed something incredibly rugged and spacious to drive through ridiculous terrain, I'd want one. But otherwise, I feel like, it's not... Yeah, I mean, you drive this thing, you better look like Crocodile Dundee. Or at a minimum, like Higgins from Magnum PI with the sort of, tan outfit and the pith helmet or something. I mean, you really do have to be a specific sort of character to drive this thing. If you're getting in this and driving it to Whole Foods, as a lot of the owners do, you're just basically a poser. I mean, it's not what this thing was built for. And frankly, for the money, there's much more comfortable vehicles you could have to do the duties that you're giving to it. I mean, this thing is meant to be just beaten to death in some of the roughest terrain in the world, and that's where it actually shines. So again, incredibly iconic vehicle, and it was cemented in history with tremendous global recognition. I don't think it's true anymore, but you go back to like the mid-1990s, like 25% of the world population, this was the first motor vehicle they ever saw. Was a Land Rover. I mean, that is where they went. That was their mission, is to go out and explore the far reaches of the earthly universe. It all began in the late 1940s in post-war England. The Rover Company, they built luxury cars before the war, but they weren't going to be selling particularly well after the war. That just wasn't what war-torn Britain was looking for at the time. Also, their factory in Coventry was bombed, absolutely devastated. They had to set up shop in a brand new empty factory that had been used to make engines for the Hercules airplane. So they moved in there. It was just this big expanse of empty space. Coming up with all the tooling and production equipment to make luxury cars again would be impossible, just not economically viable. So they had to come up with something. And at the time, England was allocating materials. All the raw materials were sort of, at a minimum, and the government, being England, was dishing them out to different companies. And they gave preferential stuff to companies that were making agricultural or industrial equipment. They got the, stuff more than luxury car makers. So Land Rover came up with an idea. In fact, a guy named Maurice Wilks, he was then Land Rover's chief of design, said, look, let's put together this quick, rudimentary vehicle that we can sell and get some money in while we're tooling up to build cars. And that's what they did. Morris had a Jeep at home. He was, obviously it's a bit taboo to bring that up on the subject of Land Rover, but let's be perfectly frank. The man was inspired by the Willys Jeep of World War II. He had one. And the first Land Rover prototype was actually built on a Jeep chassis. So, it's not really a secret where the guy got his idea. But, as it progressed, it did end up differing from the Jeep a fair amount. So anyway, the government was prioritizing equipment. After the war, after World War II, steel was very hard to find, while aluminum was plentiful. It was, all the scrapped World War II airplanes. So they decided to make the thing out of aluminum. They took this Jeep chassis, they put a very simple body on top of it, started to put it all together. And they thought, we're going to make this thing. We're going to get the government contracts for, getting the correct materials. It's going to help the government get the foreign exchange currency that it needs. We'll build them for a few years, and everything's going to work out great. Then we'll get right back into car development. And, it didn't quite go that way. So they ended up building it. They put it all together. It started selling fairly well, and ended up outselling the cars that they eventually did start building again. So there was just no reason to get rid of it. Was, again, built on the Jeep, basically. But, I'll tell you, part of the stuff that makes these Land Rovers great is not necessarily resulting from engineering brilliance, but again, from the post-war needs of the time. So they had this aluminum. They didn't have a lot of equipment. They needed to make bodies. Rather than come up with fancy rigs for tooling bodies, they thought, okay, we're going to make a really simple slab-sided aluminum thing that, a couple of guys can cut on a jig. And so they did, and that was the body. When they came up with the frame, it didn't, continue on a Jeep frame. They ended up making their own frame. It was a welded box frame, which is incredibly tough and rugged and perfect for an off-road vehicle, but also a necessity to cut down on expense and complications of building a U or I-frame vehicle. So, while you look at the Land Rover and say, wow, they were so clever, they also did kind of what they have to do. But as a result, the simplicity and ruggedness of it absolutely made the thing pretty cool and pretty rugged, and is what led to its ability to be what it became. So anyway, it's exotic now, but aluminum was everywhere then. It was chosen over the steel. All of the early vehicles produced were painted in basically a light green, some shade of light green. That was also a surplus thing. That paint was intended for military airplane cockpits. But of course, when the war ended, they ended up with all this extra paint, and, Land Rover was, ready to jump on it, and that's what they painted it. The first prototype actually was a center steel steer vehicle. And the emphasis was on agriculture. It was almost meant to be something of a tractor. It had a PTO accessory drive, front and rear, to drive agricultural equipment. The center steer part did not make it into production, but the PTO did. And they started selling them. They started getting exported. Of course, Britain had ties with, Africa and India and Australia and all these sort of exotic locales through their evil colonialism and, trade routes that were set up. So these things started making their way around the world globally. Of course, Jeep got the market in the United States, but almost everywhere else you saw Land Rovers, and that continued and continued. And the series Land Rover, as it became known, went for 3 generations and was built all the way until 1985. We're talking first year, 48, 49 through 85, a 35-year production run, which is, extremely long in the car world. But again, that was all based on its simplicity and its ease of operation, and of course its abilities to to get around rugged terrain. In 85, they stopped building that series Land Rover, at least in the first world, and switched over to these cars, what would become known as the Defender. It wasn't then, but it is now. And basically it was the same car. I mean, the body panels weren't altogether much different, but it now had a coil spring suspension instead of leaf springs that was a little bit more civilized and better, actually, for articulation on four-wheel drive purposes. So that was a big step up. They started building, 4 doors, 5 doors, pickup trucks, that sort of thing, special purpose vehicles. And, of course, Land Rover went through all the same shit that all the other British car companies did, and ultimately ended up with British Leyland and ended up suffering, with the poor quality that came from the late British Leyland period. But they did continue, and that was, that was a good thing, because now we have them today. Let me pause for a minute, get my crap together, and then we're going to continue. All right, so let's jump back into it and knock this thing out. So, look, the original Land Rover, again, built till 85, replaced by this one, which was more or less the same thing. They really didn't get names until the early 1980s, when they became the Land Rover 90, 110, 127, and there were also some 130 models. Now, those numbers were based just on the wheelbase of the vehicles, and that's how they were identified. Fast forward a few more years, and you ended up having the Land Rover Discovery coming out in 1990, so they had to differentiate these things, and they became the Defenders, and the Defender 90, the 110, the 127, the 130, and that's the way they would continue up until 97, when U.S. safety regulations made them, you're talking about a design that happened in the late 1940s, so it just couldn't stand up to the stringent safety regulations that had proceeded into the late 90s in America. So that was it. That was the end of the Land Rover Defender, at least in this body style. It has returned, as of 2020, as now a monocoque. It does have off-road capabilities. It is a tough vehicle, but it's also very much, again, something that could be driven by some angry blonde woman named Diane to her realty appointment where she has road rage on the way and, 4 glasses of wine before she left. So it's a different world. It's just a different world now, and I'm trying to get used to it, but I haven't really yet. But across all of the different variations of Land Rovers, the original ones like this, they became iconic every bit as much as, say, the Model T or the Volkswagen Beetle. Again, when you're talking about, something that basically paved the way for civilization to reach incredibly distant, remote shores, it's going to be something people have noticed, and that's what happened. So anyway, look, let's take a look at this one and see where we're at. You can see the design is incredibly box-like and simple, and that is, again, part of its strength. The older ones had the headlights closer together in the middle. They're now spread out, as of the, second body style. Obviously, it's built for off-road rugged terrain. It's high, it sits high. You see it as a rock guard there in the front under the bumper. It has grills everywhere to protect the lights, a little chrome push bar, which doesn't look like it's going to push much. The high beams are those big lights there in the center of the grill. You've got diamond plate on top of the hood, presumably so you can stand on that while you're loading the top or, fjording a river. It's got an antenna there, though it doesn't have a radio. Very simple steel wheels, big mud flaps, fold up running board steps there, which frankly are annoying because the target to hit is so small. When I'm getting out of this thing, I end up missing it and end up, sliding down because I'm not a big guy. But anyway, it has them to get in, which is probably good. More diamond plate sort of on the bottom. The body is all aluminum. You can see the greenhouse is absolutely enormous. No problem really with visibility in this thing other than the way the glare hits the windows and makes it hard to see stuff. You can also see a big narrow window up on the top, which is, definitive for the 5-door, 4-door 110 Defenders. Getting here into the back, you see more light guards, brush guards. This one came from England again. Apparently a very famous Land Rover service and restoration shop, Church Farm 4x4 in Norfolk and Bawsey. There it is. And you've got the British number there. If you call it, you're probably going to have to add some extra digits to get it. It's got a center door in the back, which is interesting. And again, it's extremely utilitarian, looks very tough. You pull up somewhere in this thing, people are going to notice. But they're also going to think, does he merit it? I mean, if you get out of this thing wearing a polo shirt, they're just going to know you're a poser. You see the incredibly high ground clearance. And of course, this one now has the coil spring suspension. It's interesting that it's a 93 British model because there was actually a US model in 93 and it hadn't been out here before that. The original luxury Range Rover, which debuted in England in 1970, kind of famously driven by Prince Charles and whatnot. That came to American shores in 1987 to the delight of yuppies everywhere. And even though some people claim it's the first luxury SUV, it probably wasn't. In 66, there was a Jeep Super Wagoneer that probably deserves that prize, but deservedly or not, people think of that Range Rover as, something that set the trend for luxury SUVs, and it certainly helped. But the Defender wasn't out, and then in 93 they brought 500 of them over. They were all finished in white. They had exterior roll bars, which were kind of cool. They had, this has a big galvanized roof rack. Those US models also had a roof rack, but not quite the same as this. And they were 40 grand, 39.9, which was a ton of money back then. So it basically assured that the people who bought them would spend more time in a, mall parking lot or, heading to a Starbucks than they would in any sort of off-road activities. But it was to the misery of 4x4 people everywhere. Truly one of the best off-road vehicles in the world, and most of the people who like going off-road just couldn't afford one of those 93 Defenders. And if you want one now, they're about 100 grand or more. Again, there are only 500 of them. One thing that's interesting about these guys, first, the longevity is epic. The strength is epic. The vast majority of the cars that were built by Land Rover, these cars, these tough Defender series, the earlier series, they're all still on the road. I think like a 60 or 70% survival rate, which is much, much higher than a lot of other cars. That one, the 93 American model, was powered by the 3.9 liter aluminum V8, which also came in the Range Rovers at the time. This one, being British, has that 200 TDI diesel, which we'll get into a minute, and that was used in that Range Rover or Land Rover Discovery. That was not in America. We didn't really have the diesels in '93 then, but we had the gas motors. But otherwise, globally, it shared sort of a detuned version of that motor. But anyway, a tremendously utilitarian vehicle. A lot of people want it. A lot of people love it. But the truth is, they're probably just better off getting something that makes more sense. Anyway, let's dive into this one. So we're going to start in the back. It's considered a 9-person station wagon. It even says it here on the back. Look at that, Land Rover. They eventually dropped the hyphen, but it still sort of continues within their badge here. But it's a 9-person 4-wheel drive station wagon, or an estate, call it what you want. So it has more capacity than even most, minivans today. I mean, the kids in the back are going to be pretty chipper. They have their own seats. There's really nowhere to stuff them that's uncomfortable. I wouldn't want to ride on these seats going on any kind of a long trip. But for a safari or running through the woods or even a quick trip up to the Whole Foods supermarket, it's going to be fine. And you can see all the utilitarian door latches, pulls. Everything on this thing is built to rugged standards that survive. And it began as a necessity, both for financial and purpose-built reasons, and continued because why not? And people dig it. So they've tried to add a few little bits and pieces to make them more civilized, but the charm of these vehicles is their crudeness. I do love all the little bush guards on it, the big tube bumpers. There's the exhaust pipe coming out. You see the rubber. I prefer those mats to have that girl, the mud flaps. I mean, it would be much better to me if it had that, chick with the crooked legs on the bottom. That would make it more exciting. So if I owned this thing, that's what I'd have. Let's have a quick look under the hood. All right, so you have to go over to the right side. I keep forgetting that. I got in the true driver's side of this car yesterday and couldn't find a steering wheel. It was kind of annoying. I don't know why I always end up in right-hand drive cars. All right, so here it is. Here is that 2.5 liter turbo diesel. This was a sea change. Because of cost constraints, it basically used the same architecture as the earlier diesel models, but was otherwise all new. It was all aluminum, which the other one wasn't. It had a very modern Bosch direct injection system, put out about 110 horsepower. It's not a lot of horsepower, but it's a diesel, so it has torque, about very close to 200 pound-feet of torque, and was more than enough to motivate this thing down the road, and certainly over bumps and bruises and ruts and valleys and elephant wallows and whatever it is you're going to be running your Range Rover through while smoking a Camel cigarette and sharpening your Bowie knife. So it had what it took. And again, the American models were V8, and you could also get the V8 everywhere else, but the predominance of these things ended up with diesels, which is probably the correct engine. You can see it has a intake stack, which does make it, more off-road-able. You can end up fjording very deep ruts, get water up over the hood, and it's not going to suck that water into the intake. So, without question, it is one of the most capable and incredible off-road vehicles in the world. That's going into a very, run-of-the-mill 5-speed manual gearbox. Shifts nice, decent enough, farm tractor-ish, but of course that's what it is. And they used a full-time 4-wheel drive system as opposed to a 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, with lockers up front. This thing is always 4-wheel drive and has a transfer case with 2 or 3 different level. I can't remember. I think it's 2 with differential lockers as you need them to get through rough terrain. So, you know, it is just simple, rugged, proper, and has everything you need to get through the worst terrain in the world. And it's sort of a shame that morphed into these sort of, you know, the Range Rovers that we see today, the Evokes, and the, it's just, you know, oh God, how the world just ends up bastardizing itself makes me sick. Anyway, I'm going to get my shit together. I've got a bunch of stuff to put in the back. Then we're going to look at the interior and take this thing for a drive. So bear with me one moment. All right, so let's have a look inside this thing. So here in the back seats, which are not open, that's wonderful. Let me open this thing up. All right, so here in the back, your Canadians are going to be pretty, well, I don't know if they're going to be chipper, but they'll be chipper enough. You have decent leg room. You have more headroom than Mean Joe Green would need. You could fit 3 across on this incredibly non-luxurious utilitarian seat. The seats do, of course, fold down for extra cargo room. You can see you have window crank handles on a very cheap-looking door panel because, again, this is almost a military-grade vehicle not meant for creature comforts. I mean, it's almost hilarious to see those speakers up there in the roof. The thing just isn't made for that. It's meant to traverse Africa and, you know, show elephants and rhinos to tourists, you know, riding in the back, you know, or, you know, little Japanese guys who want to collect tusks or rhino horns. So it's just not exactly what the modern American yuppie wants, but at the same time, they all seem to want one. All right, so look, down here, yeah, well, you know, you can see the box for the seat. It's just, again, all it reminds me of those Puch Wolfs, you know, the original German G-Wagon meant for military use, and the way they've been bastardized by the Kardashians to become something else. This one didn't quite get the same treatment. It never got quite as luxurious and continued as the G-Wagon, but of course that's probably because it didn't meet the safety standards. But all right, so these are retractable little steps. Let me hop in. Oh, God damn it. Hit my head on that thing. Get in the right side. We'll see. Actually, let me pull up a little bit, get out of the sun. One thing I haven't gotten used to is the key turns in the wrong direction. To start it, you twist it towards you, not away from you, which frankly takes a little getting used to, and I can't even imagine why that is. It just doesn't seem like something anyone would need to do, but, you know, again, Britain. All right, so let me pull up and get in the shade. Now, the American Model 93s had a much fuller dashboard with more gauges running all the way across. This British dashboard is more utilitarian with little cubby holes and places to put shit and, you know, more in line with what the original Range Rover was. I don't know what's vibrating, but it's annoying. It's just the way it is. You can see we have a little gauge pod here. You got your 110 mile an hour speedometer, which is a joke. I'm sure it caps out somewhere near 80. You got a fuel gauge, you got a temp gauge, you got a clock, and then a shitload of little warning idiot lights and such. I don't know what this switch does. Oh, there it is. It turns on the I don't know why I couldn't hear that yesterday, but I couldn't. But anyway, that turns on the cooling fan. Obviously, there's no air conditioning. Don't know why they don't have a radio in it, because they've got a harness for a radio and it's sitting there, but it's not there. Don't know why. Should be. Down here, you've got a cigarette lighter, so you can be like Joe Camel. This is your wipers, which I'm not going to run. You've got more instruction shit for the, you know, here's a very standard truck-like 5-speed manual shifter. Down here is your, man, I would love to take this thing back through Peter's the back of his house and said, I can't, I'd like to, but you know, I don't want to rip shit up. But anyway, there's your transfer case control with the differential lockers where you can go into lower, high, or neutral or whatnot, and that is kind of a shift on the fly thing, I believe. Steering wheel column is not adjustable, but yeah, frankly, your seating position isn't all that bad. You got more rocker panels down there. It looks like a defrost, your hazard switch. I don't know where the horn is. There it is on the stalk. You gotta try and find that when you need it. Let me get my seatbelt on. And then we'll go for a drive. And again, visibility is pretty epic. I mean, you've got nothing back there but windows. You even got sky visibility if you need it. But for some reason, I still have a hard time changing lanes. It's probably just because I'm sitting on the left. You do have dual side mirrors. Center console-wise, it's very wide. Reminds me a little bit of a miniature Hummer. You've got cup holders here that would fit almost nothing. Weird little insert. You got a nice little center console area here. I've got a Bluetooth speaker in there so I can listen to music on the way into work. I don't have to be alone with my thoughts, which is dangerous. What a great place to put some sort of a bear defeating handgun, like a Wildy, you know, 45 Winchester Magnum, or you know, a Colt King Cobra Python type thing, or any number of, you know, big caliber revolvers that you're gonna need to protect yourself in the wilderness or in the Whole Foods parking lot. Alright, let's go for a spin. Now, you do have a nice high seating position, which is of course what the blonde ladies like. They like to sit up high, them and effeminate men. But of course, when you're in the world of off-roading, it also makes a ton of sense to be able to see what's around you. Peter's Gate did get a lot faster. First gear, I won't call it a granny gear, but it is pretty quick. And you know, here's the thing about these, is they actually are pretty civilized on road, particularly when they went to this coil spring suspension. You know, by 1993 standards, the ride on this was pretty good. You know, today, obviously, with all the computer aids and shit, maybe not so much. But back then, it was considered as having a pretty good ride. It's fifth gear. Let me pause it here because I can see that we're getting nothing but glare through the windshield, so I'll pick it up again at the end of the road. Alright, so the thing is basically a farm tractor. It's an expensive farm tractor, but it's still a farm tractor. And that's a good thing. I mean, you know, there's virtually no terrain that this thing won't go across. It's not going to get stuck. It's what it's made for. It's just a very, very tough, simplistic, military quality, utilitarian vehicle made for the roughest conditions of the world. And of course, that's why all the yuppies want them. Obviously, you know, because when you have to go get a fucking artichoke at Whole Foods, why not do it in a vehicle that, you know, you could traverse Africa in? Anyway, we're in fifth gear. You know, the thing goes down the road decent. The steering is very reasonable, not bad at all. The ride is nice. There's no complaints at all. Although, again, there's a horde of other vehicles, including, honestly, the Jeep Wrangler, that would just make a lot more sense, price versus reward thing, for the vast bulk of people who probably will never even take this thing on a wet road, never mind, you know, crossing streams and going over obstacles, you know, using winches to get up the sides of mountains. It's just not the duty that most people are going to give it. So almost exclusively these things are going to be driven by posers. Or I suppose there's a few guys out there who just, you know, want something that if the shit goes bad, if it all goes bad, something that's going to be able to get them wherever they need to go. You know, the quality issues that Range Rover, Land Rover had led to Toyota variants, and, you know, the Nissan Patrol, the Toyota Land Cruiser. They stole a lot of the market share from Land Rover, but at the end of the day, this was still the first, not the Jeep, but it was still the first, at least in many places it was, and is a tremendous vehicle today. So look, if you have an interest in this one, it's for sale at Auto House in Naples. Nice guys down there. Give them a call, 239-263-8500, or on the web at autohousenaples.com. I'm going to do another video soon. I've got a bunch of cars I'm getting ready for a Mecum auction coming up in July. There's a 78 Corvette, that Pinto we talked about. I just bought a bizarre international truck which defies description, but we'll talk about that one when the time comes. And otherwise, we'll just keep plugging along. So thank you very much for having a look today. Really appreciate it. And we will see you with the next one. Take care.